Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of Beyond the Finish Line with Joe Hardin. And today we have Lynn Rogers for this spectacular episode. I knew I had to get Lynn on the podcast after I watched a really good documentary by Athletic Brewing Company called Inches 2 Miles, where Lynn stars alongside with two other really super inspiring athletes. One being a good pal of mine, Timmy Howard, who I had the pleasure of having on for episode 1 of the podcast. I also consider Timmy a good friend. Uh, Lynn's story really inspired me. She was so raw and honest and vulnerable in this documentary. Lynn is a triathlete, many things, a scientist. She also struggles with CIPD. And you might have to help me with this, Lynn, when you come on the podcast. Chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. And in this doc, she talks a lot about that. And also, while this is happening, she is taking on Ironman Lake Placid. That's super rad. And real quick, before we bring Lynn up, let's get some housekeeping out of the way. Friends of the pod, your support is invaluable. So do me a huge solid. Please like, share, subscribe, rate, review the podcast at the Ever the Athlete Podcast Network, to be specific. Wherever you get your podcast content, if you like what you see, please do us all a big solid. Aside of my show, we have 6 other shows. We have Fireside Chats with Ohm and Jason, Fiery Embers with Ohm and Jason. Also, Running Tales with my man Craig Lewis, What's in Earbuds with me and Ohm, where we talk about all things running and music related, and Caffeinated Coaching with Lori Haug. Your encouragement is what helps us build this community, and we can't thank you enough for being an integral part of this. We can't do it without you. So without further ado, let's bring Lynn forward for this great. Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Joe. Good. How are you?
Yeah, great. Outside of some technological hiccups, that's kind of like the ongoing joke now. It's kind of par for the course for all Run Try Bike podcasts. It's like if we don't have some kind of snag, it just wouldn't be Run Try Bike or the Athlete Podcast Network.
Well, that's the. So, if we didn't have some kind of snag, it probably wouldn't be a triathlon, right? So it's par for the course there too.
Yeah, right. So maybe we just got that out of the way, and then hopefully we'll be smooth sailing. And that was on my end. I don't know what happened. I do a podcast almost every week, so I use the same setup every week. But today my computer had other plans. So like I start every podcast out when my guest comes on, I like to kind of ask a big question. And I would like to know who is Lynn Rogers. I know that's a big question.
Oh my goodness.
Sounds like you're a lot of things.
All right. How would I define myself? Who is Lynn Rogers? Lynn Rogers is a lot of things, I guess. I hope Lynn Rogers is a good friend. I hope that I am a positive presence in people's lives. I am, as you mentioned, amateur athlete. Enjoy being an athlete, but certainly am not a pro, never was, and absolutely will never be. So I do a lot of the swim, bike, run, a lot of lifting, things like that. Trail running, all the good stuff. Like you mentioned, I'm trained as a scientist. So my background was in rehabilitation engineering, biomedical engineering, studied stroke recovery for a long time. I've kind of transitioned that into, there's been a lot in the last 7 years to transition into being expert in other things. And so teaching myself to be expert in the immune system, for example, and then to be an advocate for those that need it in a variety of different ways, both in the community that you mentioned, the CIDP community that I am in, but kind of across individuals, because there's so many things that are not specific to a given disease that create awareness for your own self and, how things work, how the medical system works, how you need to advocate for yourself within it, that are absolutely not specific to my disease. So I hope I'm multifaceted. And yeah, that's who I am. I'm a coffee lover. I am a beer lover, and, any more non-alcoholic beer drinker as well as regular wine, beer, whatever. So yeah, world traveler, person who is interested in the world.
Oh, I love that. That's kind of maybe not to the same scale, but I like to think I'm a little bit good at a lot of different things. So the same thing. It's like I kind of like dabbling in like 1,000 things, maybe not necessarily being the master of one, but
I was just going to say, I am absolutely not the master of one, particularly not anymore, but try to have, a finger in all sorts of different things if I can.
So before we get into like, cause I'm curious about, it's not, the exact same thing, but I do know a little bit about like diabetic neuropathy. My mom has struggled with stuff like that. So I have a question about CIPD, but first, I know that this kind of moves along with that because you also work in neurology too, right? So I guess I want to know how did you start down that career path? I guess I'm curious about that. You work at Northwestern, right?
I did. So eventually,
Okay. Yeah.
My undergrad, I did a little tour of the Big Ten, we like to say. So my undergrad is from the University of Illinois and was a kinesiology major. So focused on biomechanics and exercise physiology, was just really interested in those things and decided to go to graduate school, had the opportunity to work with a professor at the University of Wisconsin up in Madison that he is a mechanical engineer, but was teaching biomechanics in the kinesiology department. And as he's one of the best engineers I've ever known, Craig Rubin, he's grew up on a farm. And I don't think there are better engineers, better mechanics in this world than farmers, right? You have to solve problems with what you have on hand, right? And you're trying to do it as economically as possible. You're really trying to do it with literally what you have around you. And I saw that as how he attacked, how we built things. We built everything from scratch in his lab to answer whatever questions we were interested in looking at. And he was in a place where he was interested in cycling, was interested in using biking to understand kind of the motor control system, how we control how we use our limbs. And cycling creates a really nice way to study repetitive movement because you can control it, right? With walking, you're controlling your balance. At the same time, you're controlling how you use your limbs and, the patterns that you use, your muscles and all that sort of thing. When we have someone on a bike, and the ones that we used, we had that. So they were like completely reclined back. You take gravity out of the question, you take balance out of the question. We can put them with cyclists and how we use them in a triathlon, right? We consider ourselves to be clipped in, right? So you're attached to those pedals. So we know the exact movement that the legs are going to have. They're constrained by those pedals. And so adding all of those constraints could really allow us to look at how do we push against those pedals? And does that change depending on what has happened with the system? And so stroke is an area that we started to study because in a stroke, typically you have one side of the brain and therefore one side of the body that's been affected and the other side that hasn't directly been affected. So you almost have a comparison within that person from how do they use their good limb, or how do they use the side of the body that they can control with the undamaged side of the brain, and what do we see from the side that's now being controlled by a damaged side of the brain. And it just allows us to take that balance out of the question, all those different things. And so I was coming into the lab at a time where he was just starting to ask those questions specific to a neurological disease. Because as a biomechanist or biomechanist, he was not necessarily studying disease. He had been looking directly just at how do you push on a pedal, human that we are. And so I really loved the addition of addressing a medical question, of asking questions about in a situation where people are really striving and looking for answers that will benefit, how they're able to move through the world. And that just kind of lit a fire. So it was started as a master's degree in biomechanics. For me, as we went along, I was kind of like, okay, I think this is super cool. But as someone who doesn't have an engineering background at the time, I felt like there just weren't enough tools in my toolbox to answer and address the questions that were coming up that were specific to neuroscience and that were specific to how are we going to build this thing and how are we going to analyze this data. And so that inspired me to broaden my study up at University of Wisconsin. And so I picked up a master's in biomedical engineering. So I kind of had to start at the beginning and take all of the undergrad classes as well, while I was continuing to do my master's in kinesiology and mechanics, and then eventually went to Northwestern to work on my PhD and get a PhD in biomedical engineering. And so I was working with a physical therapist who had been collaborating with my professor, my advisor, Craig, up in Wisconsin. And so we just continued on the work that we had been doing. And I dove a little bit more into the neuroscience of the question as well as the mechanics. So it was kind of a slow moving thing, but honestly, it started, my interest in like even considering the science of things really started when I was a gymnastics coach. In undergrad, I had been a gymnast growing up and then was a coach. And I was a gymnast that had back injury as part of what kind of ended my career. And I had so many athletes that were having back injuries, and they would go to the doctor and they would get a prescription for physical therapy. And they would be told that their back hurt because their core is weak. And these were kids, and they would be told rest from practice and do like 25 sit-ups or whatever. And these are kids that could rip off like 500 sit-ups. Like their core was not weak, and a few sit-ups would do it. And it just made me realize that there's not enough information, that there might be some really gaps lacking in the info and the help and what we can give to someone that goes in with an injury, with a problem, with whatever. And just that little nugget of like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem appropriate for my gymnast. And I wonder, has anyone studied this? And do we really know? Just lit those type of questions, and just the asking of questions in general that set me down a very long path.
Oh, I love that. So, I work in engineering too, but it's far removed from biomedical engineering. But so in the off chance that I do get to like talk to biomedical engineers, I'm just like, whoa, like I obviously realized really quickly we are not in the same arena here, but it's just
it's crazy, cool. Right? Because that whole biomedical, that umbrella is massive in terms of what that means, and amongst my friends that were going through and working on their PhDs at the same time, like we were doing such vastly different things, and biomedical is another kind of jack of all trades, maybe not yet master of any, right? Because it depends on what question you're going to be looking at, whether you need to be a material science expert, whether you need to be a chemical engineering expert, whether you need to be mechanical engineering expert. It's kind of, it all depends on which system of the body, which whatever of bio that you're going to be going into. And so absolutely, it's vast, and it's really a specialization within conventional engineering, I would say, more so than anything else. It's an interesting thing. Not to say that there aren't very good, there are very good undergraduate, for example, biomedical engineering programs, but you have to eventually dig deep into something to find yourself in a place to really be expert and really work on a particular problem. And in that, you will probably find yourself in your day-to-day, what you do with your hands, with your brain, to be much more specifically aligned with a chemical engineer or a material scientist or a mechanical engineer or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I just like, I'm kind of comfortable in my SolidWorks with my 3D printer, like doing rapid prototyping. Every once in a while I feel smart and like want to talk.
That's pretty great. That's pretty great. That sounds pretty cool to me.
I'm pretty comfortable where I'm at.
There you go.
So yeah, thank you for running me through all that. It's just something that fascinated me when I was kind of scrolling through your Instagram. I was just like, sure. Whoa, like, so I want to get into the Inches to Miles documentary, obviously, but maybe we just start there because I want to know more about CIPD too. Maybe we could start there and then Yeah, let's start there.
What is that?
Tell
Should we
us,
start
yeah,
with the
tell us
basics of
about this,
what
please.
CIDP is and then kind of back
Yes, please.
into why I now know about it? Sure.
Yeah,
So CIDP is chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. So all of the pieces
Did I get it right?
of that kind of define, I know it's a lot, define what it is. So chronic. Keeps happening, continuous. It's the idea of it being an ongoing problem for the individual for whom has it. Inflammatory, it involves the immune system. It involves the aspects of the immune system that come in and are part of an inflammatory process. Is usually a healing process, which is usually a coming in and attacking an invader kind of a process. Demyelinating is what happens to us. And what that means is myelin is the coating or the insulation on the electrical wires that are our nerves, right? So if you can kind of think of the wire for your, I was going to say, I mean, everybody has earbuds anymore, but if you can think of having your earphones, right, that have a wire connection, inside what you see, the outside of that plastic, that's the insulation. So the version of that inside your body is the myelin that is on that. And then the wire is in the middle, and that's the same for your nerve. Demyelinating means that the myelin is being taken off or taken away from the nerve. Polyneuropathy is the result of having demyelination. In this case, polyneuropathy can be the result of a lot of different things. It's a symptom. So as you mentioned, having familiarity with diabetic neuropathy, for example, neuropathy is having an issue that is targeting to the nerves. And so you're feeling things in many cases that aren't actually there. In diabetic neuropathy, that is a function of a lack of circulation. So the blood flow isn't there. And so the nerves aren't able to work properly because of that. In my case, the nerve insulation has been damaged or eaten away at. And that means that the signals being sent by the nerve, both down to muscles and then back up from the periphery, are being impacted. And so that nerve, and poly meaning it's from multiple places, right? So multiple nerves, multiple places. In this case, it involves both sensory and motor. And so motor meaning you are not getting signals to your muscles in the same way that you're supposed to. They're garbled, they're slow. And so that can impact how well you're able to use your muscles. It can make it so that you can't contract them when you want to. It can make it so that the muscle withers away because it's not getting the signal anymore in the worst cases. On the sensory side, when it's the information that's going up to the brain, that information doesn't look the same or sound the same to the brain anymore when it's coming through a messed up wire. So you can think of it as what's reaching the brain is like when the speaker is like crackly and you're just, the signal isn't coming in right? The way the brain interprets that is that you might feel burning, you might feel tingling, you might feel stabbing, you might feel electrical shocks, you might not feel anything, you might have numbness. There's all sorts of things that go into sensory neuropathy, as well as not being able to know where your body is in space. So if like you close your eyes and, whether your toes are pushed down or up, whether your ankle is extended or lifted up, in extreme cases of sensory neuropathies, you may not know whether your foot or your toe is extended, bent, whatever, without being able to look down and see it. You just can't feel it anymore. It's kind of wild and crazy, but those are the pieces that are involved in the definition. It may sound familiar in some of its aspects to anyone that may be familiar with multiple sclerosis, because there's a lot that looks and feels very similar between these two diseases. The difference is that multiple sclerosis is the attacking of the insulation around the nerves that are inside the brain and inside the spinal cord. The difference in CIDP is that it's dealing with all the nerves from outside the brain and spinal cord. So everything outside the spinal cord that's sending information back and forth. So multiple sclerosis and CIDP are similar, but one is within the central nervous system. The other is in the peripheral nervous system.
Okay, so CIPD is extremity, right?
Basically, it's in the periphery. Okay. And in multiple sclerosis, you're going to feel the extremities. You're going to feel, because you have signals, right, that are going down to the brain and coming back from from the extremities. They're going through the spinal cord and they're going up into the brain. And those signals are just getting garbled at different places. So the person might feel neuropathies, they might feel numbness and all these things, but the interruption that's happening, that's creating those feelings, for them, it's happening within the spinal cord and within the brain. Whereas for someone with CIDP, that interruption is happening anywhere. You can think of it from the fingertip all the way back to where it starts to go into that spinal cord. That damage can be happening anywhere along the nerve, but it has common features between the two.
Wow. Thank you for that. So, I mean, I know like actually having to go through that is probably, very challenging, but also like the human body is just like such a wild, it's like such a wild
right?
machine. Like
it's a wild machine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So thank you for telling us about that.
Sure.
I basically just like kind of did like a short Google of it, and I was just like, wow, like first of all,
what is that? Yeah.
How do I say some of this?
Well, no, I know, and it's kind of crazy. It's related to, so CIDP is related to, and this might be something that people are familiar with. I've found that, so Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, is something that exists out there in the world, and it is a very closely related to CIDP. Basically, Guillain-Barré syndrome is acute inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, whereas obviously CIDP is chronic inflammatory, blah, 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 right? So the acute versus the chronic. So in GBS, and so what happens with that? Where does this come from? That inflammatory part of it. It's the immune system that starts seeing, for reasons that no one really understands, it starts seeing that myelin as an invader. It confuses it. It doesn't see it as self anymore. It thinks that it's a foreign object. And when we have anything foreign in our system, our immune system exists to get rid of that. It's there to harm us, right? It's how it identifies bacteria and viruses and dirt and all of these things, is that they are other. They are not self. And something happens within the system where the immune system gets confused, and it thinks that myelin coating is an invader. In Guillain-Barré, it's a short-lived confusion in terms of the attack that happens. The attack itself is usually over within weeks, like 2 to 8 weeks. The body doesn't retain the memory of the myelin being an invader. It just gets confused. It launches this enormous attack. It can do a ton of damage. Don't get me wrong. Unfortunately, you have people that it happens very fast. In Guillain-Barré syndrome, often you have people going from feeling like maybe slight numbness to paralysis, complete paralysis, sometimes on ventilators, within 72 hours. It can happen really, really fast. That attack happens quickly. It doesn't continue to happen for the rest of their lives, but they may be recovering from that attack forever. Nerves take a long time to heal, and there is no medication that exists that heals our nerves. There's nothing we can take. There's no surgery we can have that can fix a damaged nerve. You just have to wait and allow the body to slowly heal itself if it's able to do. So chronic is that immune attack happening, but it's happening over and over and over again. The idea of the myelin being an invader, being foreign, needing to be attacked, gets saved in the memory of our immune system. And so it just keeps attacking it over and over and over again. And so, yeah, it's a different thing. Most of us have not met someone necessarily that's had it or know of it. What I found so for me, I had a chronic inflammatory case that came on fast for CIDP. And so at first I was diagnosed as having Guillain-Barré syndrome, as having GBS. And it was kind of amazing. I did not personally know anyone who had Guillain-Barré, but as that became known as like my diagnosis, we suddenly found that it was like the Kevin Bacon game. We were only 1 or 2 degrees of separation from somebody. Like everybody knew somebody who'd had it. Everybody had heard of somebody that lived in their neighborhood or was their cousin or was their whatever. Like it wasn't totally foreign in terms of Guillain-Barré. CIDP is not as commonly known, but it's along those lines. So yeah, it seems crazy. It seems completely out of the realm. But when you start to talk to people, you find that there's at least some familiarity or some knowledge of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I guess we talked about backing into inches to miles. So
Right.
tell us
So what the hell
about,
happened? Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so, you know, obviously I like blown away. Like when I watched documentaries, it's like, wow. First of all, I mean, I was just blown away by your story. Um, and all that you did in the documentary. So let's talk about how tying inches to miles into like how yeah, how am I going to word this? Let's tie in inches to miles to you finding out about CIPD.
Right. So, I mean, what happened and what we talk about a little bit in the movie, we kind of shorten it, and I'll try, I promise, to do that here. But, 7 years ago, so this was 2017. At that point, I was a lab director at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago. It's a rehabilitation hospital. It's now known, and we literally were our new identity, which is the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab is what we were turned into and what we are. So Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. Along with that, I was a faculty member at the medical school for Northwestern and a member of the faculty in the neuroscience program. So I have, this academic world, and I was studying stroke rehabilitation. I was studying how people recover from stroke. And I'd also just branched into working on something that I was really excited about, which is having a better understanding of how female hormones impact rehabilitation. And so we were at the very, very start of a large grant that had been awarded to really dig into this very much necessary and often ignored area of women's science and rehabilitation. So that was just getting going. And we just moved into this new fabulous hospital, and we were just kind of getting this project up and going. And there was a day that I was at work and suddenly just realized that my fingers were tingling. They were odd. They were numb. I washed my hands, and it was like I was wearing plastic gloves when I had my hands under the water. I wasn't really feeling the water. And it was bizarre. And so, lucky me, where I work, what I do, I immediately am asking colleagues, like, what do you think this is? And we kind of thought about it. And it's like, well, it's both hands. So it's probably not a pinched nerve. That would probably be one side or the other side, or, just thought our way through, but really didn't come up with a good reason or had an idea of what might be happening. The next day, I realized that the same phenomenon, the same sensation is happening in my feet. My toes are now numb. And it was a lot like, at that point, a constant pins and needles, right? If you could think of that sensation, like they had fallen asleep, but they're just not waking up. Super odd. Third day, my tongue goes numb. And that was just kind of like, okay, this is crazy. This is all different things. This is progressively happening. Reached out to doctors, was talking to people at work, eventually was sent to the ER. And I would be brought into the hospital as an inpatient. And this was all happening, Wednesday was the fingers, Thursday was the toes, Friday was the tongue. And so this is like Friday midnight by the time I'm being admitted into the hospital. So a lot of the tests that I needed weren't going to be happening until Monday. It was just a wait and see. And I had the neurologist that was on call at that point in time that came to look. He was aware enough that familiar enough to know that the possibility might be Guillain-Barré here. And so part of me being admitted was also to watch and see what happens, to be concerned that I might have that, crash that we were talking about, where you go to paralysis, need a ventilator, whatever, happens really fast. But it didn't. The tingling kept going. All the symptoms were still there, but it wasn't dramatically worse by Monday. And by that point, we've done every blood test they can think of. I've had an MRI. What has started to happen for me is that I was having just unbelievable, excruciating back pain overnight, but only overnight. By 9-10 o'clock in the morning, which unfortunately also happens to be when doctors do their rounds, the back pain was basically gone. And so it was crazy. It was keeping me up all night, and it was horrific, but it would go away every day, which was really strange. So all of the tests, the MRI, everything comes back clean. By Monday, we do what's called an electromyography test, which there's a way to test what's the conduction speed, how fast am I sending signals down my nerves. And all of those, with the exception just a little bit of my fingers, were all normal speeds. So it looked like the nerves were functioning normally. And the little bit that wasn't in my hands, I'm a longtime cyclist. Every biker that is watching has had the experience at some point of being on the bike and your hands go numb, right? Like the circulation, just there's different things. And so there was just kind of the question of, well, maybe all of these years of cycling every single day and whatever, I've got a little carpal tunnel, I've got a little something. That was the only thing that was there. So it's one of those things, that it's like, okay, we have an explanation for this. It would seem like nobody really knew. It was like, no, you're fine. Like you're okay. I went home and I was 10 days out at that point from doing Ironman Canada. That was going to be my second full Ironman race. Yeah. So I'd done all the training and I'd just gotten into taper, right? I'm just tapering, right? In these last 2 weeks, and all this craziness is happening. I tried to do a workout. I've been in the hospital since Friday. It's now Monday night. And so I have missed many workouts. And so I jump on the bike and that feels a little weird, but mostly okay. And then I tried to brick it right afterwards. I tried to run and I was just unbelievably aware that if I would have tried to, I couldn't figure out how to push off. Like the idea of jumping felt so strange to start running. And I just knew that if I was going to try to do it, I was going to land directly on my face. I was horrified. And so I came in just bawling, crying. It was like, something is really wrong. But we went back to the hospital the next day. And so now they do a spinal tap because what they're looking for, a marker of Guillain-Barré syndrome in particular, is high protein in the spinal fluid, cerebral spinal fluid, without other abnormalities. Basically, that's the myelin breaking down and it ends up with a high protein level there. And what came back was the exact top number of normal, right? So we didn't know, this is part of like, you're going in, I've never had a spinal tap before. We didn't know what my normal level was to know if it was elevated. All we knew is that normal, and I think it's 45, goes to 45, 0 to 45 is normal. And I was at 45. And so I was told, there's nothing neurologically wrong with you. They had seen some narrowing in some, minor disc problems and whatever in a couple places on my MRI. I'm like, of course you did. At that point, I'm 41 years old. I'd been a gymnast. I had broken my back when I was 16. Like, of course there's crap in there, right? I'm not going to make it this far in life without there being something. But that was the only thing that could be pointed to say, this is maybe what's explaining this. I was told not to go do that crazy race, of course, but I will defend myself and say every doctor ever in my life has told me not to do that crazy race, regardless of whether it was a sprained pinky finger or whether it's maybe something that I have now, done my due diligence and been to the doctor multiple times over to test for. And so with friends and family all flying out to Whistler and myself being, having trained all that way and whatever, I packed up my stuff and I went. It did not go well. I was never able to start the race. I got worse and worse and worse while I was out there. Finally saw a doctor the day after, cheering friends on through the race and finding that once I had sat down on the ground, for example, to cheer at a particular spot on the run course, I couldn't get back up again. I couldn't do it. There was a point where I needed to cross the street and realized that I was facing a high curb and could not step up. And then was like, okay, I can crawl. So I crawled over the curb. And then I was like, okay, now I can't stand up from here. And crawled to a stop sign and pulled myself up hand over hand to get on my feet again. Like, that's the point of bad we were at. Saw a doctor out there and they said, okay, by that point, I was weak. Everything was showing. It was bad enough that all the tests that I had, passed for that last week or whatever, I'm now failing miserably. I'm not strong. I've got no coordination. I can't do anything. And the doctor is like, the airport is downtown Vancouver. The hospital is downtown Vancouver. You get to downtown Vancouver. If you can still breathe, get on the plane and fly back to Chicago. If you can't breathe, go to the hospital. And that's kind of where we were. And thankfully I could breathe. So we got on the plane, took a red eye overnight, landed at like 4:35 in the morning, took a cab directly to Northwestern Hospital. And it would be 4.5 months later before I went home. So it was wild. Wow. It was wild. But at that point, it was diagnosed as Guillain-Barré. They thought that was the acute acting, and it took relapsing over and over and over again in the hospital. I would do well, and then we would get treatment. I would respond to the treatment. And then 10 to 14 days, 10 to 12 days after treatment, I would tank and go back to paralysis again. And so we'd have to go back to the acute hospital, treatment. Hey, I'm doing better. That would last a week and a half, 2 weeks. Then I would tank back to paralysis over and over and over again. And that's really the only way you can diagnose CIDP is time that this is happening. If you have an acute asking case, there's no blood test, there's no nothing, there's no overt test that you can do that says, is this Guillain-Barré or is this CIDP? It's just, does it keep happening? Do you keep tanking after approximately 3 months or so? And so that's when we knew that this was my system had retained the memory of the coding on my nerves as an invader, and it was just attacking me over and over and over again.
Are the treatments like an infusion or of some sort?
There are only a couple different options. The first is an infusion. It's an infusion of immunoglobulins. So basically, it is a donation that is a combination from almost 10,000 different donors. So that's a really lovely that you bring it up right now. Plasma donations are massively in need for a variety of reasons. It's how you treat burns, intense burns, but it's also very helpful to another of autoimmune conditions. And so the first thing we try is an infusion, and you're basically flooding the system with good antibodies. You're trying to drown out more or less the attacking antibodies. And that can be really helpful to some people. It was not helpful to me. I didn't respond to that. So the next thing we try is, instead of flooding the system with good, we try to get rid of the bad. And so antibodies exist in the plasma, which is the liquid portion of our blood. And so we do what's basically a plasma transplant. It's called plasmapheresis. And basically you take the blood out of me, run it through a machine, separates it, throws the liquid portion away, and then infuse. And in my case, it's a synthetic plasma product that gets put back in. It gets remixed with my cells, my red and white blood cells, and then gets put back into my body. And that worked. That was helpful. So that is what we came back to each time that I relapsed. And that is what ended up being truly one of the only things that's been helpful. Steroids as an immunosuppressant to slow down the production of these things that are attacking can be helpful. And I was on steroids for 5 years or so. They were helpful. But steroids have side effects. They have really awful side effects like osteoporosis and glaucoma and diabetes and all of these things. And so being on a high dose for a long time isn't great. There is only now a couple of other things that have started to exist as newer treatments that are infusions of their own kind that do different things that some people are finding to be effective. So we're a disease that's been around for a long time, but like plasmapheresis as a thing available at the hospital goes back to like the 1950s. So it's not new, and there really are very few options. There's a couple of treatments that I mentioned that are coming out that are new. And one that was just FDA approved this summer is the first new treatment for CIDP in 30 years. First new treatment. There's been like tweaks on these antibody infusions, and we have some things that we basically steal from the multiple sclerosis treatment options. But to have a drug that's specifically designed, or a treatment that's specifically designed for CIDP, first thing in 30 years. And so we'll see how effective it is. It's past FDA approval, which is huge, and it looks really promising, but it's only just becoming available in the United States. We'll see what happens. But yeah, for me, it's basically a plasma transplant.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, obviously that's a good PSA to donate plasma, right, everybody?
Right.
So.
Oh, yeah. For so many different things.
And getting past the FDA, that's a big, like, all the work that goes into it before the FDA, right? Then you have to get over that big hurdle. So that's fantastic.
Intensive, clinical trials and all sorts of amazing things that need to happen.
Coming from a very layman's understanding of how.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're bang on. Yep. Yep. So I was just learning all of that. I had no idea. It's kind of crazy. Yes, I was neuroscience, right? But I studied the brain. I studied the central nervous system. I studied problems in the spinal cord. And I did not study peripheral neuropathies. I did not study the peripheral nervous system. And so although there's a lot that I can understand in the language and the terminology, you know, and don't get me wrong, I get that I had a leg up in understanding a bit what was happening. I think it was probably a very good thing that I absolutely was not expert in the system that was going wrong for me, because I think it would have totally freaked me out. Like to if I had had a stroke, you know, or if I were to have a stroke at any point in time, that probably would have been much more terrifying to me than peripheral nervous, because I didn't know, and I was in no capacity. I couldn't Google things. I couldn't use my hands. I was so sick that I was not in a place to be seeking out information and reading articles and whatever. So doctors were telling me that, you know, a lot of people recover, and the numbers are there with Guillain-Barré. They say most people recover. Now, what does most mean? What does recover mean? That's all different things for all different people, right? And for a triathlete, I'm thinking recover for me might not be what recover for somebody else might be, but they're telling me that most people do. And so I just kind of was like, all right, cool. That's going to be me. Like, I'm going to recover. What do we need to do? You know, and I trusted the hospital and the rehabilitation center that I was in. I worked there. I was working with my, you know, with my colleagues, and I knew I was getting the best care possible. And so it was just focus on that, right? Focus on what they're telling you to do. Focus on hard work. As a triathlete, as a runner, as a marathoner, as a CrossFitter, like, we know how to do hard work. And so following a plan, starting from where you are, building up bit by bit by bit, the strength that you need to do each next thing, like all of those things are familiar to people that have chosen to do hard things in their life up to that point. And physical hard things, you know, and athletics is the way that most of us do physical hard things. Now, there aren't anywhere near as many of us that do them for a living anymore, right? So I found all of that, all of those skills that we have were massively important and useful and helpful, and continue to be, both to get past that initial get back from paralysis, and then to maintain as much strength as I can, so that when relapses happen, when flares happen, when whatever, I want to be as strong as I possibly can be, so that when I'm knocked back, I'm not knocked all the way back to paralysis. I'm not knocked all the way back to a wheelchair if I can help it, right? If I'm knocked back from really strong to a little strong, I might still be able to climb the stairs, you know?
I kind of love that outlook. It's, you know, it's just, you know, like something, if I have like some kind of adversity or some kind of setback, we're like kind of trained to be like, well, all right, like you can kind of just like identify like, yeah, this stinks, but you know, at least now, like, you know how to like build, and like we're, like you said, we're used to you know, having these like little stumbles and like speed bumps. And do you think like training for like, obviously you touched on that, but training for like triathlons is probably, I mean, it probably speaks to your character also, that you
I think it was
overcome.
huge. I think it was massive. I've finished one full try at this point, finished one full Ironman, and everything that could go wrong went well. I shouldn't say everything. That's just setting me up for the next time, and it's even worse. But in that race, coming out of the water, coming out of T1, I stepped funny, and we didn't know it until later, but I broke and dislocated a bone in my foot. And so before I even got to the bike, I was like, had one foot to work with. I knew it hurt. I've sprained my ankles 800 million times. And that's what I thought I had done. I thought I just like twerked it funny and okay, keep on going, right? Just keep moving. It'll be fine. And I got on the bike, and I probably got 12 or 16 miles. I was still on the stick, for those of you who have done Ironman Wisconsin, and I couldn't shift. I was having all sorts of trouble shifting. And in the end, what would happen is that the rear derailleur cable snapped. And so I had two gears. I could move between my little and my big gear in front. And that's all I could do on the Wisconsin course, which is just under 5,000 feet of elevation. And it's constantly steep up, steep down, steep up, steep down, hard right turn, whatever. And so I had, with my busted foot, I was figuring out as well how to ride that course not quite on a fixie, but kind of, and that had my full attention. So it was problem solving. Like I stopped to see if I could fix it. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. Okay, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to shift as minimally as possible. Okay, we're not going to shift in the rear anymore. We've only got the front. Okay, how are we going to do this? Like it's problem solving, right? And I problem solved and managed to get myself all the way through that race. I got to the finish line with a broken foot and a broken bicycle. And
Wow.
I am not the only one in that experience. When I was in Lake Placid and I was having a very hard time on the bike, I was meeting a lot of people that were pulling up the rear, right, of the bike course. And I met a guy named Mike who rolled up next to me, and he was super positive and super excited. And he was having my Wisconsin. His rear derailleur had busted. He could not shift in Lake Placid, right? So now we're 6,000 feet of elevation and more, but he was positive and he was turning over the gears. And I have every confidence that he got himself across to finish that bike in time. And if he did that, I know he must have made it to the finish line. It's problem solving in real time, right? It doesn't ever go the best way it possibly can, right? We learn to try to control the controllables, right? You do the training on the front end. You try to make yourself as ready as you can. And then you have to just figure it out as it happens. And that is life in one, whether it's 3 hour, 6 hour, or 17-hour microcosm. That's what life is too. And so applying those exact same things to, if you focus only on the negative, that was one thing I remember thinking in Madison. I'd had a million Chicago marathons that hadn't gone the way that I want to. And at one point I had one that I was just in a bad mood and I was pissed off about it the entire way around the course. And by the time I finished it, I was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? People are coming out to cheer you on. My family is coming up from Ohio. They're all spending their day and you're in a bad mood the whole time. Like either get it together and figure out a way that regardless of how the run goes or whatever, you can enjoy this, or stop wasting everyone's time and your own. And I use that in Madison of being like, no matter what's happening here, enjoy the day. Everyone has come out to do this. You have put all of these months into it. And that was huge, right? Like, don't focus on the negative, focus on whatever's happening. Don't miss your race. Don't miss your day. And that applies obviously to every day as well. We can choose. Are we going to focus on the crap that's going badly, the things that aren't how we expected life to go? Or are we going to focus on what we can do, what we can achieve, what the good is, and what's moving us forward? And all of that has pieces that can come from and lessons that come from what you've been through at life and what you've chosen to put yourself through, right? And as athletes, we're choosing to put ourselves. We signed up for it. We 100% signed up for it. Well, pat yourself on the back because you're giving yourself the opportunity for massive life lessons that you are going to pull from no matter what you go through. And everybody's going to go through something at some point. You don't know what it is. You don't know whether it's going to be you or your best friend or your partner or your parent. But everybody is going to have really tough, awful things that are going to come up in life. And it's going to help. It's going to help. These things that you put yourself through are going to help if you choose to look at them that way and if you choose to learn from them.
Absolutely. I totally agree with what you just said. I use that same mantra to control the controllables.
Control controllables.
So I love that you said that. That made me really happy because I've had those moments. It's like, well, like this shit's not going well. And, blah, 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 blah. I'm just like, well, what can I do? I can keep moving forward and I can smile about it. Right. So here we go. Right. I love that you said that. So you hit it on a good one right there.
Good. Well, it's familiar. There's so many of us that it's like whether you come across it through podcasts you listen to, books you read. If you have a coach, you've probably had a coach that is trying to get you to do that. The other piece that I think of that is a coach has said, and it just crystallized something that I didn't even realize I was thinking, was the idea of suffering. Like the more you suffer in your training, the less you're hoping that you're going to suffer on that race day, right? So which one do you want to be bad? Do you want to, go through your training and half-ass it and not really do it and have it not be hard? Okay. But then that day that you're out there on that race is probably going to be terrible. If you do the hard things on the front side, if you put the work in, if you do whatever, then that race has the opportunity to really be the celebration of all you've done, and you can manage through it. And life is that way too, right? If you do the everyday, day in, day out hard things, that when the thing comes, that's the big deal, you're in a better place to manage it. You're stronger, you're more resilient, you've done the work. It applies in all things. Yeah, athletics are an amazing little microcosm of real life, and yet applies in a very straightforward, not just metaphorical way, in that like hard work, physical hard work is things that we need to keep our body doing so that it's ready, whether it's a heart attack or your next race.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said. Like, do all the hard things, kind of front load with all the hard work, and like the day of is kind of like like your victory lap.
Your
I
victory
love
lap,
that.
your celebration,
Yeah,
and
I
that
love
may
that
not
take.
go the way you think it's gonna, but Madison, with all of its craziness, was still one of the best days that I can remember. It was so much fun. Broken foot and broken bike and all, right? It doesn't have to be that when things don't go right, it's a bad thing. It did, however, leave me wanting still, to know what a race gone well would be like. And I'm still searching for that one, but
Still
it had it, right? It had it on the other end where I had done these big, hard things. And so I knew how to train from nothing. And so you can still do that if your life has been flipped upside down. I can't run anywhere near the pace I used to. I can't bike the pace I used to. But that's okay. I can still put in the work and I can still try to do hard things. And that has become really, really important to me to strive to do in this, new version of my life.
I love that. So speaking of that, so after Lake Placid, like
Mhm.
what do you have? What do you have coming down the pipeline? Are you
Yeah.
training for anything upcoming that you can
This
tell
has
us
been a
about?
little bit lighter year, which is nice. I had a couple years in a row going for swinging at the fences with those big goals. And so this year I did Calgary half. So I did 70.3 in Calgary.
Okay.
And I've got a 70.3 coming up in Modesto Island. That's just off the coast from Charleston. So looking forward to that one in a little more than 2 weeks. But the big one coming up for me is next summer, doing something called Monster Try, which is in Scotland. It's a 5K swim in Loch Ness, 1,000-kilometer bike over 5 days, and then a 50K run into London. So that's the big swinging for the fences for next year. Yeah, that I'm training for and will be training for hard over the next year. I'm still going to make another attempt at an Ironman. The thing about Monster is that I'm doing it with a good friend. We know it's going to be stories for a lifetime. This is the kind of thing where we're going to meet people. We're going to do these things. Each day doesn't have a time limit. You just get the biking done. And so it's a ton. Don't get me wrong. No bit of this is going to be easy, but it's just a little different, than the classic Ironman race. And so the idea of it being different is really exciting to me, as well as it being monstrous, right? And huge. It's exciting. It's terrifying. I think there's a point where when you do the big ones, when you do the marathons, when you do the Ironman, like some of us really nutty people, like there's that feeling of fear that you just don't know if you can get it done. That can be such a welcome motivator once you've been doing some things that you're more familiar with, and I find that's even true, even though I am very much not in a place where I can just take for granted that if I do the work, I'm going to make it, through the race or whatever. There's just the newness is exciting and has that own piece of terrifying that, I don't know, is a little awesome. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that sounds really really awesome. Loch Ness,
I'm really thrilled. I'm really thrilled for the experience. And
who doesn't want a chance encounter with Nessie, right?
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe she can give me a ride. She can boost me through the swim. That'd be just fun.
Oh, that's so awesome. Yeah, so we'll be rooting from you from afar. That's really exciting. We're running out of time. Unfortunately, these are never long enough. This was a great episode, by the way.
Thanks.
I was kind of wanting to open the floor up to you a little bit because I found a couple things on like your link tree, like shining through, and Oh,
Oh yeah, the Shining Through
hold
CIDP
on.
project.
Yeah, can you share that with anybody that may be listening?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Shining Through CIDP, that is a website that actually, this is the perfect day to be talking about this because there's some new content that is out just today. So the intent is to connect people who have CIDP. It is to connect them to resources. It is to help them understand what their options are. It is to give confidence where people are just a little, you're feeling less than you were, you're feeling less of yourself. And so it is connected with a pharmaceutical company called argenx. Argenx is the company that has that first new treatment for CIDP that was just approved in July, so this summer. So they have put an investment into this community, both in developing this medication that may be helpful for some that are out there, but also in promoting a connection for the community. And so I have been thrilled to be a part of that with them to connect people together. So there are new things on their website right now. There is a reality series that they've been developing called Rare, Well Done, that is following a few different individuals with CIDP, and they work with a team that comes in. You can kind of think of it as like Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, but for CIDP patients, just in the way that there's a team that comes in and kind of helps them and talks about, okay, what do I need help with? Is it making my house more accessible? Is it, it's a woman named Amanda who is a young 30 and lives in New York City. She's a marathoner before she got CIDP, and now she finds herself in a place where she has to use braces to walk. She's unstable. She's not confident using a cane or a walker. And just, how do I manage the train and the subway and the whatever? And so they go through these like real life things and give some real life strategies to attack them. So those types of resources can really be rare for those that have rare disease. There's not a ton of us out there. It affects each year. There's new cases that are like 0.8 individuals in every 100,000 come down with CIDP. And for those of us that just, our prevalence in the community, we're about 8 people in every 100,000. I have never met someone else with CIDP outside of being part of these programs or going and being part of volunteering with the GBS CIDP International Foundation, which is another really great resource. Like through those things, I have found others. Instagram has been wonderful. We have a little community of people that have found each other because we're all doing all sorts of things: inline skating, gymnastics, running, triathlon, weightlifting. All of us that are active, dancing, have kind of found each other out there. But I mean, I just named 6 people in the wide millions of the world, right, that have come to be connected. Otherwise, without those things, I still have never met someone else that has this disease. So it can be very isolating. And so Shining Through CIDP is a way of connection that I believe in, and is continuing to build and is continuing to create and put out more resources, how to talk to your doctors, how to work through all sorts of different things that I think is really necessary.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Sure.
I'm gonna have to have you on again. We didn't even get through half the stuff I wanted to talk to you
Well,
about.
I would love to anytime. And anyone that's interested, you heard more of my story here, but as you mentioned, Timmy Howard is also involved, and his story will blow your doors off. Go back to, episode 1 of this podcast to hear a little bit more from Timmy, but he and his wife Steph are fantastic. And Shannon has the third story of the documentary that I think so many people can relate to, which is, someone that finds himself in college and has a little bit more fun than sticking to, the actual doing of classwork and whatnot. Who can't relate to that? And then how, he kind of used running and movement to get himself out of that. So I was really so proud and so excited to be a part of that project, to share, the striving to do hard things as someone with a disability, but then also to be able to be part of those really important stories from Timmy and from Shannon about the things we get faced with and the hard roads we go down in life, and how we can use community, which Athletic Brewing is a huge, huge supporter of. How do we use community to keep us together and move us forward in healthy ways?
Yeah, I absolutely love that documentary. So anybody listening, I highly recommend it. I think I've seen it probably 4 or 5 times
Oh my
now.
gosh. Thank
So,
you.
well,
Thank you.
whenever I've got an ultra coming up, like me and another guy, we're both watching it to like kind of hype ourselves up for ultras. So we use it a lot
Oh,
to get kind of hyped up for stuff.
that's awesome. That's so great. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Honored and humbled to be a small part of that hype up. I love it. That's great.
So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was awesome getting you on. And it was the honor was all mine that you were here and that you shared so much with us. I just appreciated you know, how open and like real and honest and vulnerable you were in the documentary. So it means a lot that you were here and could enlighten me on the, I mean, I was just really, really fascinated with CIPD and all that you went through. So thank you so much for sharing that all with us.
It's, you know, it's one of those things. It's the struggle continues, and anyone that's out there that's dealing with a chronic disease understands that, right? The fight keeps going, and appreciate your interest, and that keeps us visible, which is important for moving solutions and moving treatments and moving rehab goals forward for everyone that's out there.
Oh, I love it. The fight keeps going.
Fight keeps going. That's
right.
just the name of the game.
Well, okay. That is going to conclude the show, episode 14. Thank you so much, Lynn. It was awesome having you on. And thank you so much, everyone who tuned in. Like I said, please share, like, rate, review the show. It would be a huge, huge honor to have you guys do that. And like I said, we can't build this community without you. And thank you so much. And I will see you next Beyond the Finish Line.